we are, week 3 in our series of How to Be Unsuccessful in chapters 7, 8, and 9 of Ecclesiastes. Now, can I ask you one question before we get rolling? Is this book making you feel better or worse about faith and the scriptures? Just take a moment and answer that question to yourself. Got it? Well, for me, I feel like this book is creeping up into my top 3 biblical books because it is such a straight shooter. Do I feel good, or do I like or agree with what we've uncovered so far, or all of it? No, not even close. However, the brutal honesty or the permission that Ecclesiastes gives us to feel, and the affirmation that we're not alone in our feelings, and the sense that somehow God is able to meet us even if we're low or bottoming out, well, to me, that's a gift. And it reminds us of the beauty and power of the scriptures. It reminds us that the Bible is not a pithy Hallmark card trying to give me a pep talk or make me feel better. It reminds us that the Bible is not a self-help book or a motivational speech meant to improve our lives. Instead, we are reminded that the scriptures set the stage for a powerful encounter, a connection point with our loving Creator. And that somehow the one who holds the universe also holds me and you and everyone you care about, and everything that's important to you, and everything that you're worried about, and everything that brings you joy. So as we wade through 3 more chapters of sludge, can you keep that in mind? That even in the middle of the muck, God has everything and everyone in hand, even if you question it. Here we go. A good reputation is better than a fat bank account. Your death date tells more than your birth date. You learn more at a funeral than at a feast. After all, that's where we'll all end up. We might discover something from it. Crying is better than laughing. It blotches the face, but it scours the heart. Sages invest themselves in hurt and grieving. Fools waste their lives in fun and games. You'll get more from the rebuke of a sage than from the song and dance of fools. The giggles of fools are like the cackling of twigs under the cooking pot and like smoke. Brutality stupefies even the wise and destroys the strongest heart. Endings are better than beginnings. Sticking to it is better than standing out. Don't be too quick to fly off the handle. Anger boomerangs. You can spot a fool by the lumps on his head. Don't always be asking, where are the good old days? Wise folks don't ask questions like that. Wisdom is better when it's paired with money, especially if you get both while you're still alive. Double protection, wisdom and wealth. Plus this bonus, wisdom energizes its owner. Take a good look at God's work. Who could simplify and reduce creation's curves and angles to a plain straight line? On a good day, enjoy yourself. On a bad day, examine your conscience. God arranges for both kinds of days so that we don't take anything for granted. Now, I'll spare you the rest of the chapter because it's just more of the same. Everything is pointless, don't bother being good or wise. And then he ends with some really unkind words about women. Ugh. So what our poor writer has done is cast a dark shadow on pretty much everything. He's frustrated, impatient, and advises his readers not to be carried away by Havel. Remember that word from part 1? He's reminding us not to be carried away by the meaninglessness of life. And yet, all the while, he's ignoring his own advice. But I can see where he's going. He's saying that sometimes wisdom works and sometimes it doesn't. He's making the point that sometimes doing good works out, until it doesn't. And towards the end of the chapter, in the section that we did not read, he calls into question whether there is anything in life that can be counted on, including God. Ultimately, he's lamenting that there are no guarantees or solutions or easy steps that lead to a successful life. In fact, his conclusion is quite the opposite, and it's this: life is absurd, no matter how much or how little you try. So why bother? But as negative as that sounds, I think what it actually does is release some of the pressure that we put on ourselves and others to be successful, and maybe even brings a levity or a lightness to life, especially during a pandemic that has smashed our desires and goals to bits. Maybe think of it like this. Watch this short video that went viral last week, and I dare you not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Check this out.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take a look.
Can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I can see that. I think if you click the up arrow.
I am not a cat, or more like, I am not a cat. Are you sure about that, man? I am not a cat, but I'm prepared to go through with this, he says. Prepared to go through with what? The trial? Or living the rest of your life as a kitten? Did you see the fear in his feline eyes when they started looking down towards the left? Or the guy on the screen above him who did one of these? Sorry, man. I am sure that you are a fine lawyer, but that was ridiculous, totally absurd, but it made me laugh. So I wonder if we can take some of that levity with us into the absurdity of Ecclesiastes, into the absurdity of life, and release some of that pressure of trying to get everything absolutely perfect. So maybe the question the scriptures ask us here is this: are you tied in knots trying to perfect every part of your life? Know what I mean? It's like he's saying, I am not a cat. Look how great I am at my job. I am not a cat. Look how well I've organized my money. I am not a cat. Look at how interesting I am. I am not a cat. Look at my kids, clothes, and clout. It's absurd, right? When we try to boil life down to a magic formula that will make us successful, or at the very least seem successful, when we pour all of our energy into trying to perfect it all, we create this unnecessary tension that follows us around and hangs over our head and robs us of God's peace. And the real culprit? It's control. Because we want to make sure that everything is just screwed down perfectly tight. We want to make sure that we have it all together. We want to manage everything and everyone. But that's absurd. It just doesn't work. I know I've tried. I bet you have. And so has our unhappy writer. So he continues in chapter 8 by saying this. Here's something that happens all the time and makes no sense at all. Good people get what's coming to the wicked, and bad people get what's coming to the good. I tell you, this makes no sense. It's smoke. So I'm all for just going ahead and having a good time, the best possible. The only earthly good men and women can look forward to is to eat and drink well and have a good time. Compensation for the struggle for survival these few years God gives us on earth. When I determined to load up on wisdom and examine everything taking place on earth, I realized that if you keep your eyes open day and night without even blinking, you'll still never figure out the meaning of what God is doing on this earth. Search as hard as you like. You're not going to make sense out of it. No matter how smart you are, you won't get to the bottom of it. It's not fair. It's just not fair, he's saying. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do the bad guys always seem to get away with it? How come there are cops out there with their radar guns when I'm speeding, but not when everybody else is breaking the law? It's unfair. Why did they find a boyfriend or girlfriend or get married before me? I'm older and better looking. It's just not fair. How can politicians get away with what the rest of us could never get away with? It's just not fair. No, it's not. And once again, our writer points out that our controlling expectations are going unmet. And this time, it's all about justice. And that can go in at least two directions, both of which, as our writer mentions, can rob us from sleep. First, and probably the most common, we're frustrated and kept up at night by those who seem to get away with it. How is that even possible, we fret. And sometimes we're also kept up at night by our own trespasses. I know that for some of you, as soon as your head hits the pillow, you are out. But if you're like me, when my head hits the pillow, my brain is like, I can see you're trying to fall asleep. May I offer you a selection of your worst memories from the past 10 years? So, whether you're kept up at night by your own injustices or the injustices of others, thank God that no one gets what they deserve. Do you really want to start keeping score? Do you really want to roll out the record books, search history, or security tape of your life? Do you really want to start comparing? I don't. So the next time you get antsy about who deserves what, remember, we are saved gratis, by grace. We do nothing, and we deserve nothing. It is all, absolutely, and without qualification, one huge, hilarious gift. And everybody said, Amen. Remember that lightness we talked about earlier? Here it is again. There is something about what God is up to that releases the pressure of trying to control everything, including justice. Because here's the thing, guys. Justice is in God's jurisdiction, not yours, and certainly not mine. So perhaps the question for us here is this: where can you offer grace instead of comeuppance? It's a good word, right? Where is it in your life, like right now, that you can swap out retribution for restoration? You know. Who is under your skin these days? Who has been a thorn in your flesh for some time? Who is it that seems to be getting away with everything while you toil away? Could it be that the same grace extended to you needs to be extended once again? After all, grace can't be earned, right? How absurd to think otherwise. Okay, one last excerpt, this time from chapter 9, and then we'll tie all of this together. Well, I took all this in and thought it through inside and out. Here's what I understood. The good, the wise, and all that they do are in God's hands. But day by day, whether it's love or hate they're dealing with, they don't know. Anything's possible. It's one fate for everybody, righteous and wicked, good people, bad people, the nice and the nasty, worshipers and non-worshipers, committed and uncommitted. I find this outrageous. The worst thing about living on this earth, that everyone's lumped together in one fate. Is it any wonder that so many people are obsessed with evil? Is it any wonder that people go crazy right and left? Life leads to death. That's it. You've heard the saying, right? There are only two sure things in life: death and taxes. And our author probably would agree. Now, the scriptures offer us other certainties, but before we get to those, let's make note of what the Bible never promises. The Bible never promises good health, financial prosperity, and happiness. Plus, it doesn't tie faith and righteousness to those things in a simplistic way. Now, it's true that living life in the way of Jesus is the better way, and that God's blessing can include good health, financial prosperity, and happiness. But what is untrue, however, is that a faithful and obedient person will only and ever possess such things and can somehow avoid illness, disaster, and death if she or he can just play their spiritual cards right. Isn't that just another power play? Another way to control the situation so that we can get what we want out of it? Or maybe is this an attempt to actually control God? Plus, when we buy in to that half-baked theology, we insult every Christian throughout the past 2,000 years who have known illness, poverty, and misery. So what our writer is missing here, as he unhappily lumps us all together and says all that we really have in common is that we're going to die, is this: what is God up to? What does God want? What is God able to do? And what is it that God hopes for you and for your life? Think about it. God is much more concerned to make us holy and to shape us into the image of Christ than he is to make us happy, rich, and healthy. And what does that mean? It means that God cares more about you being whole than anything else. And we can chase whatever else we think is going to make us happy, healthy, and rich. But have you been tracking with this book? The author has been saying this whole time, I tried that and it didn't work. So know this for certain, my friends. You are literally loved to death by Jesus. And God wants nothing more than to make you whole. All of that, thankfully, is also out of our control.
So, as I promised last week, this week we're going to talk about the practices for the 40 days of Lent, which at first glance can feel like it doesn't fit in with the themes in Ecclesiastes, because it's sort of like we're leaning harder into the very things that the writer names as meaningless. But I kind of think that this book helps us also think more clearly about Lenten practices and clear out some of the clutter that can surround them. First off, Lenten practices are not self-improvement projects, like the writer of Ecclesiastes says. Lent is not 5 steps to firmer thighs. It is not a technique we employ to be our best selves. Lent, instead, is about recognizing that our imperfection is actually the very thing that opens us up to grace. Secondly, while practices for Lent can be and have been used as ways to control people or for us to control our own lives, these practices are not meant to be about control. They are meant to be about surrender. And finally, Lent is not about earning God's love. You are absolutely and completely loved by God, and giving up something for Lent will not change that one bit. You are free to mark Lent or not mark Lent. You see, we don't control God, but practices can open us up to God's love and grace, which is always there, but sometimes we just have a hard time seeing it. And so we're kind of brought back to our theme verse for Lent from last week. Do you remember it? It's this. This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, says. Only in returning to me and resting in me will you be saved. In quietness and confidence is your strength. Okay, So Lent is the 40 days leading up to Easter, when the church has traditionally fasted in order to prepare to feast on the best day of the year on the Christian calendar, Easter. Lent is also a way that we enter into and tell the story of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But it isn't just about an outward observance. It is, at its heart, about returning to God, like Isaiah 30 says. So the question is not just, what will I give up this Lent, but what will allow me to return to God with my whole heart? It is about giving up lesser things for the sake of something greater. So you may or may not be invited to give up something this Lent. Maybe you've talked to Jesus this week and there's no invitation there. But this is something I've experienced to be true in my life. It's called the holy shoot factor. A friend once told me that when you're taking a personality test, there's always a holy shoot factor. She didn't use the word shoot, but this is church. She said that whatever personality you really don't want to be is often the one you fit best in, because we don't really like to see or hear the truth about ourselves or who we are, and we're often, even unconsciously, resisting something that we really need to look at. And I think this can be true for Lent. Is there one thing that when you think about giving it up, you just experience this deep resistance, or you try to justify or skim by it or give reasons why you just can't give that thing up? If that's happening in your heart, I would suggest that maybe that this is an invitation. But also, if this is happening in you, let me remind you again that God will not love you any more or any less based on whether you give that thing up. But it does have the potential to help you experience that love more deeply. Giving that thing up might lead to more freedom. It might lead to transformation. So here are some examples. Maybe you're being invited to give up social media. Do you use Twitter or Facebook or Insta or Snapchat compulsively? Like before you even know it, you're just scrolling through. Or maybe you use these things, these platforms, for affirmation or recognition, for that little hit of dopamine that comes with a like or with a view. When you feel uncomfortable feelings like loneliness, sadness, boredom, or anxiety, is there a go-to you use to avoid or numb those feelings? Last week we talked about longing, that underneath everything there is this deep longing in us for God. And often these uncomfortable feelings are pathways to our longing. They're pathways to God. So giving up the things that keep us from feeling these things actually might be a way to return to God with our whole hearts. Or maybe the invitation is a little bit different for you. Maybe there's an invitation to give up gossiping or speaking negatively about someone or some situation. Or as Joe said, maybe there's somewhere in your life where you can give up retribution in order to make room for restoration. Maybe you need to give up trying to control people's perceptions of you. Perhaps you need to give up justifying yourself or making excuses for whatever is broken or just imperfect in your life. There have been times in my life when I have had to give up control of relationships and situations, and I feel that invitation this season as well. So maybe Lent is an invitation to let go of something, and also an invitation to rest. Now, I know that giving up something for Lent is not everyone's jam. Maybe your past experience with Lent has been one of legalism, or it just isn't something that really compels you. That's okay. If you're feeling this way, just skip the question, what can I give up? And instead ask yourself, how can I return to God with my whole heart? So instead of giving something up, you might want to add something. You might want to add a practice of prayer or quiet or solitude. And on our webpage, we're going to have a couple of devotionals written specifically for Lent, if that's compelling for you. Or you might want to revisit or recommit to a practice from the last few months that felt like it was calling your name. maybe add something for Lent. It's also COVID, and you might feel like enough has been taken away. Fasting from one more thing is just more than you can handle at the moment. I get that. Maybe you need to add something to your life that brings lightness or joy, or you just need a way to count down the days of Lent as we hope for a brighter season ahead. Here are some Lent light ideas that might help sustain you through this hard season. I see you, moms and dads. Sit down with your family and list 40 nice things, kind things that you can do for one another and for others, or ways that you connect to God. Do one thing a day. Or in the past, I've made this into a bingo game. This way, you don't have to feel like you have to do one every day, which can feel like a lot when you're running a household, but you can still fill a line straight down or diagonally or do a box around the outside. It's motivating for some kids to see it on the page like that, but it's also a way of reminding us that Lent is not about perfection, but about opening ourselves up to God in the real moments of our lives. You could write a letter each day or an email to someone you love or miss or want to encourage. Pray for them before you send it off. Make the list as a family and have each person take turns writing or deciding what to communicate or making a piece of art, especially if you have little people in your home. And if getting a letter in the mailbox is just one thing you know you won't be able to get done, just take a picture of the card and send the picture via text. And this feels like a fitting practice for this Lent when we can't be with the people we love, but we still need to be connected to one another. Finally, I saw a Lenten practice trending where each day you take a picture or write something or draw something based on a word. Words like tradition, hunger, enemy, help, or healing. And it's just a way to be present in a couple of moments of your day, which can help you also be open to God. We're going to have a list of resources on our webpage if you want to explore some of these Lenten practices further. So this week, commit to a practice for Lent. But while you're doing that, also remember that there's nothing that you can do to make God love you more or less. The question at the center of Lent is, what will help me return to God with my whole heart? Remember, all of our longings really are